Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week, you're going to find practical lessons here on the show about cueing, sequencing, and building the mindset of an empowered yoga teacher. My goal is to help you step into every class with the knowledge you need, the confidence to make your own decisions, and the ability to trust yourself as a teacher. Let's get started. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 417. I'm recording this on August 13th, 2026, and this will go live on August 17th. And here we are. We're kind of headed towards the end of the summer. Like I said, I'm recording this on Thursday, and tomorrow we're headed out for our last little trip of the summer. I mean, truth be told, we only took one other trip, but I'm super excited for this one. Every year we go to Maine and we go to Portland, but the past couple of years we've gone to this really quaint little town called Higgins Beach, and it's in Scarborough, if you're familiar at all with it. And it's just the cutest place. It's got its own little beach, and they let the dogs run free in the morning from 8 to 9, and the surfers surf. And then it's just like an open beach. They have like a little snack shack. They have a great little inn that we stay at, which has a really, really good restaurant. And it's just such a cool family sort of summer vibe. And then when you want to go into Portland to go shopping and go out to dinner, it's just like 15 minutes away. So we're going to do that this weekend. And I'm always so grateful because I have a company that I use to walk my dog Coco a couple of days a week. And the owner of the company, he and his wife stay here when we go out of town, and they have two rescue dogs, and my Coco's a rescue dog. So the three dogs get to hang out together in the house, and our dog walker and his wife stay here, and they consider it like a little staycation. So it works great all around, and I'm just so glad that we have him as a resource because I never would board Coco, and I always want people to stay here, and he's just like the best. So this will be, kind of like one last thing we do for the summer, and then I have a couple of little things I want to do here in Boston. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm curious what you're doing for the end of the summer. If you've got something coming up and you feel like sharing it with me, definitely drop me a line. I'd love to hear. So with that, today the theme is really summer and kind of the end of summer. And I think that's a natural transition time. I've talked about that before on the past couple of pod episodes I've done, just with that whole idea in mind of how, as we get to the end of the summer and the beginning of fall, typically classes tend to get bigger, busier, more beginners. And so this is like a really great time to be buttoning up your sequence, working on learning anatomy, building your confidence. Like it's really a good time to get things in place so that when you walk into the room on September 1st and going forward, you really feel like you know what you're doing. You can trust yourself. And so as we're headed towards the end of summer, I've just been reflecting on everything that's happened over the past few months. And I really, at the end of May, made an intentional plan for June, July, and August that looked a little different in terms of running my business than before. And at the same time, I think it's just natural, like I said, at the end of August to become kind of reflective. And so when I think about, the podcast episodes that we've had over the past 3 months, June, July, and August. I mean, I interviewed Lauren, one of the yoga teachers I've worked with in my program. She had such a great conversation with me. She shared so openly. Her podcast episode was one of the most listened to that I ever had. I did episodes on sequencing and cueing and how to cut anatomy overwhelm. There were just like a lot of good topics that were on the podcast. So that was just kind of one thing. My social media was kind of interesting this summer. I actually kind of for the first time shared something pretty vulnerable about how I felt. It was the beginning of the summer. I was at the pool. I was in a bathing suit. I wasn't really feeling that great about how I was in my body, how I looked. I took a picture of myself and I just shared really vulnerably on my social media and it just blew up. It was like over 100,000 views, hundreds and hundreds of comments from women just sharing how they felt and, just about the topic of a two-piece bathing suit or a full-piece bathing suit. It was just really, really interesting. And I remember when that happened, I thought, wow, there's this whole other lane of being on social media that I never tap into because a lot of my content is, of course, yoga teaching related. So that was kind of an interesting experience. In May, I did a workshop about how to create a sequence that you love. And if you missed that as a workshop, it's actually a podcast episode that I released in the past couple of months. So you can take a look for that. Emails that I got this summer were from teachers who were feeling overwhelmed with learning anatomy, teachers who were feeling like, why couldn't I learn it the first time when it was presented to me in teacher training? Teachers who shared, a lot of their concerns about stuff that was happening in their classes and how they were feeling. And so when a teacher got to a point this summer that they were reaching out to me in the DMs or an email, they were really at a point where things were really concerning them. Let's just say that. I had a couple of phone calls with teachers that were just so great to have conversations, like live conversations, and hear how things are going and what teachers have as their vision for how they really truly want to be teaching. Over the summer, I had a handful of teachers, I think it was 6 teachers enroll in the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program, along with a couple of teachers who enrolled in my practice portal and my mindset method program. So I was thrilled to have an opportunity to work closely with those teachers and continue to. Some of them enrolled just last week. And that's, to me, that's like such a privilege to be able to work with someone one-on-one, hear what's going on with them, hear what their challenges are, and work with them in a coaching capacity to help them build their confidence and skill as a teacher. So that was part of this summer. And then for me and kind of the direction of my business, just really looking at where do I want to go with this? What's really my next step? And I think September is just for me a natural time to have those conversations with myself. It's kind of like instead of back to school, the kind of thing I think of. So I wanted to share with you some of the lessons that came up for me that were really informed by my conversations, maybe even with you if we've talked, email or DM or somehow comments on social media. But these lessons I'll share with you are things that I've pulled from the past 3 months of just running my business, having conversations with teachers. Before the summer started in April, I was out in Cleveland at Cleveland Yoga doing an in-person training for the weekend. And I pulled a lot of really good information from teachers about, what are their challenges? What are they looking for more support on? Things like that. So the first lesson that I learned this summer through interacting with people in my community is that people often learn quietly. And by quietly, I mean they don't always comment, they don't always send me an email, they don't always send me a direct message, but they are watching my stuff and listening to my stuff and they're learning and it's resonating with them. And the reason I'm kind of curious or not curious, the reason that kind of hit me as a revelation is that's such a different way than I learn. Like I was always the kind of student who sat in the first row, and I'm always the kind of student even today that asks a lot of questions and likes to develop a relationship with the teacher. And so when people are sort of out there learning quietly, and I find that out when we talk and they go, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcast for the past few months and I'm really finding it helpful." Or when they send me a message or an email and they'll say, "Oh, I've been, watching your videos on social media and I have this situation happening and I wanted to share it with you. I'm looking for some help." So just seeing that people are kind of built differently when it comes to how they consume content. Like let's call it content because that's primarily what the word is that I think reflects, at least what I'm doing, whether it's podcast episode content, social media content. And so that's definitely a message and a learning that I took loud and clear over this summer is that people often learn quietly. And so that has shifted how I look at what I used to look at as silence. Now I look at it as, hey, I see people are watching these videos. Like even today or yesterday, I did a video breaking down one of the alignment problems in Warrior One. And within like 3 hours, it had almost 2,000 views. And when I looked at my phone, I was really surprised. So that is proof. People are learning quietly, even if I don't hear from them. And so that was definitely a takeaway. So if that resonates with you and that's the kind of learner you are, I see you and I acknowledge you. The second thing that I pulled from this summer as a lesson is that teachers aren't really looking for more information. I mean, I think the idea of understanding anatomy better does sort of bump up against more information, but it's not always emphasis on more because the emphasis on more is the problem because people often think anatomy is hard to learn because there's so much to learn. And so the emphasis on that word more just continues to contribute to people feeling overwhelmed. So in general, what I learned was that teachers aren't looking for more information. They're looking for confidence. The conversations I've had with people really demonstrate to me that there's this gap between where teachers are now and where they want to be. And oftentimes, in a word, they consider that, or you can sum that up in a word of confidence. Like, I wish I felt more confident. And, interestingly enough, some of my, most watched videos this summer weren't really about anatomy. They were about mindset. They were about confidence. They were about trusting yourself. They were about questioning a lot of things that honestly, yoga teachers have been told for years that really just don't make sense. Like I remember I did a video about the whole phrase of calling people that come to your class your students. Like, oh, my students come to my class, or my students don't like it when I change my sequence, or my students really, really need restorative work, or and just that whole verbiage around using the phrase my students as if there's some sort of ownership there. And in my opinion and in my experience, that phrase, my students, and what it conveys, which is not really ownership, but responsibility, is what turns into a huge block for yoga teachers to their confidence because now they feel responsible for the people that come to their class instead of looking at the people coming as, hey, they're here on their own, of their own free will. I'm not responsible for them. I'm responsible for the sequence, for the cues, for walking around and watching them, for rephrasing cues based on what I see. That's what I'm responsible for. But I'm not responsible for students liking the class. I'm not responsible even for people not getting hurt. If they get hurt, that's not because of me. It might not even be something they knew about. I mean, and that's a whole other conversation. But if that really hits you funny, it's definitely something to consider because a lot of the messaging the teachers get, especially around injury, conveys this message that you as the teacher have some control and need to worry and have a responsibility to ensure no one gets hurt. I mean, of course, we have a responsibility to maximize the experience for them and minimize the chance of injury. But we have to, in understanding anatomy, appreciate that there's a chance people are going to get hurt. And that's not because of us, right? And again, I should probably do a whole episode on this. If that's something that you'd like to hear, drop me a line and let me know. It's definitely, I don't even want to say it's a nuanced conversation, but it's definitely something that is its own conversation. So this is part of what I drew from this summer, that teachers aren't always looking for just more information. The next thing that came up when I was just reflecting before recording this episode on things that I learned this summer is that the things we let go of create room for what comes next. And, the interesting thing is how this came up for me is that a couple of weeks ago, I decided to once and for all take care of some business debt that I had been carrying for a while. And so I had to just do a couple of things to take care of that. And I guess in my mind, I thought, well, it's business debt, so it's okay to have, these were investments I made in my business. And specifically, one thing was around personal coaching. But it just got to a point where I was just really feeling like I wanted to clear that away. And so I made a personal financial decision this summer, and I paid off business debt that I carried for years. And I can tell you on an emotional level, I felt such tremendous relief. I felt also with it just a sense of responsibility that I kind of put on my big girl pants and took care of it. And grateful that I had the ability to take care of it, as well as recognizing that I have so much more mental space now that I no longer have that. And so, just this idea of letting go so that you create room for what comes next. And that sort of leads me to lesson number 4, which is this idea that when your mind is no longer occupied by the past, you can imagine the future. And so I'm curious for you as you think about heading into the fall of this year, what are the things that you are imagining for the rest of 2026? What are the things that you're excited about? What's something that you might really want to do that you're a little scared to do? I know for me, I've got a couple, actually 3 in-person training sessions I'll be doing, one in Pennsylvania, 2 in Massachusetts, and they involve me teaching in person the step-by-step anatomy blueprint that is the backbone, the cornerstone of my online programs. And, I did this in April when I went to Cleveland Yoga, and I just absolutely love being in a room, whether it's for a half day, a day. 2 of these trainings are full weekend events. So I'll just really have a chance to like be in the learning space with these teachers and guide them through the blueprint. And so I'm really just so amped up to do that and to share because I just have such good not only memories of how this went down when I was in Cleveland, but just all the teachers that I've worked with in my program and the aha moments they've had are just so magical for me to witness. And so I'm looking forward to that. I'm also I've been toying around with this idea for a while, having a space of my own after 20 some odd years of saying, I don't want to have my own yoga space. But I've really been letting my mind go and thinking about what would I really like it to be? And when I really allow my mind to go, it's full of ideas that have more than just yoga classes for adults. I have a long history of working with children, teaching children's yoga, running preschool pods where we did a lot of different things. We acted in little plays, we did art sessions, we did reading sessions. I've done so many story times in and around different parts of Boston. And so I just started to let my mind go and started to think if I had my own little space in Boston or Newton or Brookline, what would I envision for that? And I just started brainstorming on a big piece of paper, like a whiteboard paper. And so I just encourage you to just let your mind go and just ask yourself as we head into the end of 2026, what are the kinds of things that have you excited? What are the kinds of things that come to your mind when you think about not letting your mind be occupied by the past, but instead to think about the future? Lesson 5, another thing I learned this summer is that trust is something that we practice. And I've really been leaning into using the word trust to describe, you know, the feeling that you have when you're teaching at an elevated level. That it's more than just repeating cues, it's more than, practicing with your class and looking at your notes and being driven by the belief that you have to show up with a new sequence every time. It's walking in the room, feeling confident, trusting that you know what to say, trusting that you know the sequence well enough that you can walk around the room and watch your students. And just that feeling that trust conveys. And I'm wondering as I'm sharing this, what's coming up for you? That feeling of you're walking around the room, you trust that you know what you're doing. You're not wondering, do they think I'm qualified to do this? You are just nailing it. And you're doing it in a way where there's no real attachment to the class. You believe in the value, you believe in the benefit, and you're not doing it for likes. You're doing it because you really firmly believe in the job you're doing, in what you're offering, in the value that you're conveying. So it's not really about them liking it. It's really more about, hey, I've got a job to do. This is a really important job. When you think about what we do as yoga teachers, nobody else does what we do, not even physical therapists or psychologists. Like nobody else does what we do. This magical combination of movement and breath and um, strengthening and lengthening and the mental process, if we look at the 8 limbs of moving inward, the multifaceted nature of yoga, no one else is doing what we're doing. Not the Pilates teachers, not the exercise fitness teachers. They're doing their own thing, but we're doing our own thing. And what we're doing matters a lot. And so instead of thinking, I wonder if they like this class, or I'm worried that they're going to get hurt, lean into what you're doing and the value that it has. And if you're finding that it's hard for you to believe in the value, let's talk, because that's definitely something to talk through so that you can come out the other side really feeling like you trust yourself as a teacher. So those were the kinds of things that came up for me as I sat down and reflected on June, July, and August. And I'm just curious, like for those lessons, was there anything that really stuck out to you? And as we head into September, which, like I said, often feels like another January, I wonder if there's something that you've been carrying that no longer needs your attention, like something you could release to the universe. Or I remember when we were at my first teacher training, we wrote something on a piece of paper and threw it into the bonfire. Like, what would you throw into the bonfire? Is it comparing yourself to other teachers? Is it changing your class sequence every time you go in there to teach? Is it waiting to start teaching? Is it waiting to start charging for your classes? Is it letting go of looking for validation after every class? Is it letting go of that idea that you're not ready? Maybe the next chapter for you doesn't begin by adding something. Maybe it begins by letting something go. And that's definitely something that I found this summer. I found that I could let go of wanting responses, emails, DMs from teachers letting me know, hey, we're out here looking at your videos. And instead, I could just be a source of sharing and trust that it's impacting people. And so when I let go of that need for that expectation for replies, it gave me the mental space to just do what I love, which is teach, and to just trust that when I put it out there, it's being consumed. And so for you, I'm curious, what is something that you want to let go of before September 1st so that you can head into the fall with maybe a clearer perspective and a load off your shoulders? So I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode as we head into the last few weeks of summer. I hope you have a great one. And I look forward to chatting with you next week on the next episode of Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening. Before you go, think about what stood out to you in today's episode. If something sparked a new idea or got you thinking differently about your teaching, feel free to send me a DM. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're ready to move forward as a teacher, I've created a few ways to support you. There's the Yoga Anatomy Accelerator, where you'll learn how to apply anatomy to cueing and sequencing. The Yoga Anatomy Blueprint Learning Program, my one-to-one program, where you'll get personalized support to develop into the teacher you truly want to be. And the Mindset Method, a program that will help you discover proven ways to feel more confident teaching. You'll find the links to each one of these programs on my website, barebonesyoga.com, and it's also in the link in my social media bio on TikTok or Instagram. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.